Greetings, I'm Shad, and this is a Viking Shield of which I'm going to be speaking a little bit about. First of all, I sometimes wonder why we call this a Viking Shield, because that's not what Vikings would have called it. They would have just called it a shield. Now, I'm not trying to be a bit stupid here, because of course we wouldn't just call it a shield. We need to differentiate this type of shield from other shields, and that's why we give them different names, like Kite Shield, Heater Shield, and then Viking Shield. So I suppose it kind of fits in, but to me, I don't think it really works. The Vikings didn't call it Viking Shield. That's like me calling any shield I make a Shad Shield. I believe the best name that we can call the Viking Shield by is literally shield in the Viking language, which is Old Norse. And so what is shield in Old Norse? It is Skjoldr. 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 Spelt S-K-J-O-L-D-R. So the S-K, sk. The J-O, I believe, is pronounced yo or jol. And then L-D-R, Uldr. So Skjoldr. And I would encourage everyone, and I mean, yeah, my influence isn't that great, so I don't think I'm going to really convince anybody. Perhaps you who watch this video, perhaps I can encourage you to call this shield by, I feel, its proper name, Skjoldr. And as I feel that is the proper name for this shield, I'm going to be referring to this shield by its proper name, Skjoldr. This is a Skjoldr, We're going to be looking at this Skjoldr, I'll be getting to handle it, and you'll get to learn a bit more about it. Now, to begin, we need to understand that, of course, Vikings weren't the first ones to use a round shield. The shield harkens back to much earlier periods in time. If you go back to the classical periods, the Spartans, the Greeks, they used big, nice round shields. The Celts also used roundish kind of shields, and indeed also the Romans had a round shield, and that was called the parma, I believe. I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but I'll say it again, the parma. But as I am a medieval enthusiast, or medievalist, we're going to start with the Viking shield because it's interesting. The Viking culture and weapons and stuff are generally put together with the medieval kind of group. And we're going to be looking at the Skjoldr because this type of shield, round shield, didn't go out of practice or use in later periods in the medieval times. You see, the circle is a basic shape. It doesn't take too much creativity or thought to consider it as the shape for a shield. And so the Skjoldr, as we mentioned previously, it wasn't the first round shield ever used. A round shield, or the round shield if you wanted to call it that, has been used in many points in history, in much earlier parts in history as well. Which begs the question as to why so many cultures chose the circle as their shape for their shields. Now, of course, the circle wasn't the only shape that was used for shields in earlier parts in history. The Roman shield, which is the more sometimes called a tower shield, which is, they were never called that in history, is a large rectangular kind of shield, and they were used to great effect by the Romans in shield walls and such. So the circle wasn't the only shape adopted in shield manufacture or use, but it certainly was popular. The circle was used quite a lot. Now, I have some thoughts as to why the circle was used so prevalently over other shapes. Good question is, why wasn't the square used as a shield? And so these are some of my thoughts as to why the circle was adopted as a very prominent shape in use for shields. My first thought is in relation to geometry. The circle is perfectly even on every edge from the center grip, the handle. So that simply makes it easier to maneuver and to hold than if it was not so evenly, if the weight wasn't so evenly dispersed. Having said that though, an even square, if you are holding that shield, if it was a square in the center, the weight would be evenly dispersed. But when I talk about even geometry, a square doesn't have that. This is important when it comes to combat because you don't know at which angle or side of the shield you're going to want to attack from. And so a square, being uneven on the corners, there would be more shield out here than in the center, when you need to attack, say, on a corner part, you would literally have to maneuver your weapon around the extended corner. But the round shield is perfectly even, and so you can attack from any position from behind the shield with equal ease from one another. And so it means that you wouldn't be disadvantaged when having to attack from one side or another, whereas with a square shield, you would always have to make an account for the edges of it, because the edges would extend a bit further than the center points. That's just the basic geometry of a square. But with a circle, it's perfectly even. And see, in my mind, I believe that gives a greater versatility and more advantage in combat when using it. No matter which angle I tilt the shield, have a look at the extension of the curve, okay? So this is a perfect circle, what you're seeing now, but if I tilt it a bit this way, it becomes more oval in your sight. And so no matter where my weapon is, just that basic tilt, I can maneuver my sword or weapon literally around the shield so much easier because it's a circle. If this was a square, it might be hard to picture this, but the corner of my shield, like the square corner, would be coming out right about here. And so if I want to get a sword strike in, I would literally be hitting the corner of that square shield. And so I'd have to maneuver it further out to give room for my sword, and that actually leaves me a bit more vulnerable and open. The other thought I have in regards to why the circle was adopted over the square is in regards to shield walls. Now granted, the Roman shield, the classic kind of infantry one, was a square-like shield, so of course, you know, there's exceptions to what I'm saying here, but I do believe the circle is much easier to maneuver than a square or a rectangle. Especially when you're holding your shield out and you need to maneuver the shield all the way over and fully reverse your positioning. Now, I do believe that using a square, it would be much more difficult because those corners can easily knock and get locked in to other shields that would be squares and their corners, but with a circle, they would easily just kind of slide off of one another because that's the geometry of a circle. There are no corners for it to get really caught into anything. Now, they were just some of my thoughts in regards to why the circle was adopted as the more prominent shape in history that was used for shields. But now I want to look at the Skjoldr specifically, because even though the circle was used in many other cultures and stuff for shields, there were slight differences between them. For instance, the round shield, I don't know the specific name for it, I should have looked that up, but the round shield that was used by the Greek hoplites, their grips were not actually center grip. To my knowledge, they're actually off center, and that meant their shield extended further on that side than it did on that because their handle was off centered, and that was specifically for shield walls. That was a type of shield that was used specifically for shield walls because you have the extending back covering the guy on that side, and it was much easier to lock in your shield. It was still held by a single handle. There was no strap in regards to that. Whereas the Spartan shield, according to my knowledge, that was strapped to the arm, and they didn't hold it directly in the center. Their elbow was centered on the shield, and they would hold kind of straps or ropes on the edge of the shield, which meant, again, the shield would extend further on that side than it did here for use in shield walls. That is not to say that the Skjoldr cannot be used in shield walls. Oh yes, the Vikings most definitely used shield walls to great effect. And that is one reason why the Skjoldr has a center grip. But it's not the only reason. There is a lot of logic and advantage to have a shield with a center grip. Having said that, there's also logic and advantage to having a shield strapped onto your arm, so you need to understand the differences, and that's why I'm doing these videos. First of all, let's take a quick look at how the Skjoldr is made and built. Now, I made this with plywood, alright, and so of course plywood isn't a historical thing. Traditionally, Vikings would make their shields out of linden wood, which is a very light wood. So it does not weigh much at all. And their shields, I get a bit annoyed when I see Viking shields really thick. Now, of course, I'm sure there were Viking shields that are really thick, but according to my knowledge, most were thin. And I can see why you would want them to be thin. Now, of course, simple logic. The larger the shield, the thinner you want the wood to reduce the weight. This shield here that I have is on the larger end of the spectrum in regards to Skjoldr's. And I wanted it to be a bit bigger. I like kind of, big shields. And one of the reasons why I wanted it is for greater protection. The bigger the shield, the more area cover, more protection. It has more reach in regards to other combative kind of moves that you can do. And we might get into those, we'll see. The plywood that I used to make this shield was around 2 to 3 mil thick, nice and thin stuff. And if you're wondering what type of ply you can get that is that thin, it's a bracing ply. Generally, when you build a house, you use strap bracing, which are these metal straps that run diagonal on the frame of the house. But when the frame doesn't accommodate for those straps, if there's windows in the way or it's just an awkward kind of dimension, they use bracing ply, and it's just thin plywood that they nail right onto the frame. And so if you go to any hardware store, you would think that they would have bracing ply available, and that's what I use. Now, gee, that is a wonderful substitute and analog for the thickness and strength you want for when making a shield. So once you have your plywood, you cut the shape out of it and you just use a string to get a circle. And this central boss here, you can buy actual, bosses that are made to actually serve as a boss from online stores and everything. I just decided to use a metal bowl. This is literally a bowl that I bought from Kmart. And so I just spun it upside down, and there's my central boss for my shield. The Skjoldr was not the only shield to have a central boss. Roman shields have them, and also Celtic shields have something close to what a boss is as well. Now, what the boss does, it functions as kind of a cavity for the fist to rest, so the handle can be as close to the shield as possible, and therefore in the center of gravity of the shield. And that's important because it enables full, articulation and movement of the shield. And so if you can see it right here, see how my fist literally just kind of rests in that cavity created by the boss? And so now my fist is much closer to the shield, meaning it's much easier for me to maneuver and hold. And of course, the boss has some combative kind of elements, but in my opinion, I don't think it's really there for, a combative purpose. It does help in kind of when a sword strikes, like so. If the sword strikes a shield and comes down, it can sometimes get caught on the boss, which can give you an advantage. And you could hit people with it, but I think that's a bit dumb because hitting someone with the boss would be I reckon far less effective. You would just slam someone with the side of your shield. I reckon you could get far greater impact force with the side of the shield than with the boss. Of course, you could do it, and I'm sure people did, but I don't think, that's the reason why they put the boss on the shield. The reason why they did was to protect the hand and also enable the hand to rest closer to the shield so you could maneuver the shield far easier. The handle is straightforward, just a bit of wood all the way down the shield. Now the next part is important because this was a very crucial component in how Skjoldrs were made, because with the size, when I talk about size, I'm talking about the thickness versus size of the shield. When you have that ratio and you want to bring down the thickness so your arm doesn't die by holding the thing for so long. And so when you bring down the thickness, you're obviously losing strength, okay? And so how the Vikings basically got the best out of both worlds, lightness and strength, is that they would soak rawhide and then stretch it over the front of the shield. Of course, I don't have rawhide, so a great analog that works really well is that you just slather glue over the top, completely cover it, and you stretch material or canvas over the top, and when that dries, hard as a rock, like really, hard as a rock. And then it also has the flexibility because of the thinness of the wood that you're using. And so then you have a really, really accurate analog for a Skjoldr. But it's not to say that the Skjoldr or any other shield indeed is invincible. They're not. Indeed, the Vikings knew that their shields were very, very mortal, okay? They knew their shields were expendable items and they would break and you'd have to get new ones and everything, but they could take a lot of damage before they did. But one of the things that was intentional is, first of all, not all shields have a metal rim, and indeed there is actually no historical or archaeological evidence that Viking shields had a metal rim. I put one on mine because I like it. And again, the later period shields, and so remember that the round shield, this kind of style round shield, the Skjoldr, was still used in later parts in the medieval periods, okay? Even though there are other shields, the round shield sticks around for quite a while. In fact, it survives longer than the kite shield and the heater shield, because you see the use of the Taj, which is a much smaller round shield, but it's still a round shield and it's used in a later period during the time of muskets and gunfire. And so those later periods, look, there's a much higher chance that they would have metal rims on them, but I decided I wanted a metal rim on mine because I thought it really looked cool. But for actual period Skjoldrs, no, they would have rawhide on the edge. And so rawhide's still very strong. It could protect against a lot of blows, but eventually there would be a blow that would come in. And that can actually be a good thing, because if someone comes in with a really powerful strike and it cuts into the shield, generally their weapon will get stuck in the shield completely. And if you give a good yank while you're holding a shield, you can disarm your opponent and attack again. And so having the shield be mildly, well, you can't make it invincible, but having the shield be destructible is partially intentional, because it does give a very big advantage in combat if someone's weapon gets stuck in the shield from a big powerful blow. Something that annoys me when I see people using shields that are generally meant to be Skjoldrs, Viking shields, something that annoys me is when I see them being strapped to the forearm. Now, it's true, shields were strapped to the forearm, but they were not done for Skjoldrs, all right? Having a shield strapped to the forearm is most often done for two reasons. One, for riding on horseback. You can really see the logic behind this. Do you think that I could hold the reins of my horse when holding this shield? So remember, my fist, my hand, is located right behind the central boss. And if I am straddling a horse and the horse's neck is right here, literally the side of it, I cannot reach in far enough, because to get my hand where the reins would be, I'd have to chop off the horse's neck to get the shield close enough. But if my hand is strapped to the shield, look how much closer my hand is to the edge of the shield. That makes the possibility of holding the reins of a horse actually practical. The other reason why you would have the shield strapped to your forearm is so you would be able to absorb much greater hits and blows without the shield turning or rotating at the point of impact. Now, that is a good thing and also a bad thing. There's a give and take in what you get out of that, because having the shield being able to rotate is actually a very, very good thing, because it enables heaps of versatility in combat. It's also a bad thing because if you get hit with a very big blow, there is a chance the shield would tilt and rotate, leaving yourself open and getting hit. And so there's a bit of give and take in that, but someone who's trained to fight with a shield, they know how to accommodate for well, it's not a disadvantage. I really consider it a big advantage for center grip shields like the Skjoldr. You see, by having the shield center grip, you're able to rotate it completely on either side, and this gives a huge amount of versatility in combat. Like, a big reason why this is important is for shield walls, like we were talking about before, is you would walk up in formation with your shield held by your side and be facing forward, and then whenever you're ready to, whenever the order is shouted out, you would throw your shield out and it would lock in with the other shield, because the person who's standing here would be throwing their shield, and the back of their shield would be hitting the front part of your shield on this end, and so they just lock in, making a really strong shield wall ready to fight whoever you're fighting. So that means it's very important to have shields be center gripped when you're on foot and you're fighting in a army where everyone's using a shield. It's very important to have center grip shields like that, because you don't have that versatility with shields that are strapped to the arm. You see, have a look at my kite shield here. Kite shield fully strapped to my arm. You get a lot of good articulation, but not a lot of versatility. I can't hold it out any further than the length of my elbow without actually opening myself up. And so if I ever want to keep the shield facing my opponent, it can't go out very far. I also don't have a lot of reach with my shield. See how much it's extending past my fist? And so if I wanted to get in there quick and do kind of a jab with my shield, which is actually an important and useful move sometimes when you're fighting, especially against another type of shield, because in doing so, you can kind of push away your opponent's shield. So there's a lot of good reasons why you'd want to do this sometimes. But I've got no reach with a heater shield, and that's simply because my arm is fully strapped to it, and you know, that's what you get. As to the advantages you get by having a shield strapped to your arm, well, you'll get to see those in my video, The Heater Shield. But we're talking about the Skjoldr in this video, and in my opinion, when you're on foot, the shield that you always want to pick is a center grip shield, okay? The versatility that you get out of it is phenomenal. So you get so much advantage out of having a shield center grip as opposed to being strapped. Though, like I mentioned before, you do have advantages. We're just not going to be talking about them here. Let's talk about the advantages of having center grip in combat. One of the big advantages is kind of this open and shut kind of maneuvering that you can do with the shield. Now, you might think that if someone comes in with a really strong blow to the side of the shield, that'll make the shield tilt and therefore leave yourself open and you can get hit. You know, not so. Like, yes, the shield will tilt in the direction of the side that it's hit on, but someone who's trained to use how to use this shield would know what you do. If the shield starts to tilt, you simply just move it in the direction of where that strike came from and then counterattack. And they will generally be open, and if it's hit on the other side and the shield begins to tilt open this way, well, bang, right there. And they'll generally be open because your shield will be pushing aside whatever is causing it to move. Now, the other thing is you could do that with a shield, and so if someone comes in with their shield, knocks it open, and then attacks with their weapon, well, a good combatant who's trained in, you know, the use of the shield and sword would know how to counter that and fight effectively. And there's some great videos online that, you know, have some, you know, really talented people working with shield and sword combat, and they show you some really good moves. And you see, it comes back again to the versatility of having a circle as the shield over any other shape. You see, you don't need to rotate the shield much to open yourself enough to get an attack in, and you're still fully protected. So even when you rotate it this way, you can fully attack your opponent, and you're fully protected, and you can strike from any kind of plane of the shield. So it doesn't take much to attack from the top, from below, from each side, and you are not rotating the shield much, but you're able to do it because you are still rotating the shield, where it would be far more difficult to do that with a shield that's strapped to your arm. So there you have it. That is the Skjoldr, or as many people know, the Viking Shield. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to learn more about the uses and functions of shield combat in the Viking period, I highly recommend that you go and take a look at ThegnThrand's channel. Now, these guys, they are crazy. And when I say crazy, I mean crazy in a good way, but also crazy in the sense that I would never try the stuff they do. They really test the limits of, you know, the Skjoldr and swords and such in a very practical way, in a very extreme way that I wouldn't really dare, but those guys do it and they know their stuff. And so they particularly have a focus on Viking shields, Viking period kind of combat, and but they also branch out into other periods. And Thrand, he really knows his stuff, and so I highly recommend going to take a look at his channel. The link to Thrand's channel called ThegnThrand is below. So I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.